Now I'm going to be showing you how to do this on this 2001 Dodge Ram 1500. That's also a 4x4 and comes with a 5.2 liter V8 engine. But of course you can use the procedures used in this video to replace the transmission fluid out of any automatic transmission. And this video isn't going to be a simple drop the transmission fluid pan and then replace the transmission filter and gasket video. Because when you do that, you're only replacing about a half of the transmission fluid that's inside your transmission, or in the case of this 2001 Ram, it's actually about a third of it. Because in an automatic transmission, unlike an engine, not all of the fluid is inside the pan when the transmission or the car is not running. A lot of it stays inside the transmission, and even more probably stays inside your torque converter. Here, let me show you. Now, I don't know how much is going to come out of this, but that's not because this is empty. There's a lot of fluid in here, but we can't really get all of it out because this shaft is not inside here and turning it. So there, when you drop the pan and replace the fluid that's only in the pan, you're not replacing all of the fluid that's inside your transmission. Now, manufacturers recommend the DIY method to replace most of the transmission fluid, and that includes draining and refilling the transmission 3 times to get rid of most of the old transmission fluid. Now, in order for that procedure to not be a huge pain, you need a transmission oil pan that comes with the drain plug, which, as you can see, is missing on ours. And it's also missing on most automatic transmissions, actually. Plus, there's a much more efficient way of replacing the transmission fluid inside your transmission that I'll show you later in this video. And as always, if you see any tools or products used in this video that pique your interest, I'll put links to where you can find them for cheap in the description box, so don't be afraid to click on them and check them out. Alright, next, since we don't have a drain bolt on this pan, what I'm going to do is to remove these 5 bolts on this end, and then get our catch pan underneath here and catch all the transmission fluid that's going to drip out of there. Here we go, guys, we got it loose. Alright, so after letting this drip for 5 minutes and then cleaning our face, we're going to remove this pan. Alright, next I'm going to support this with one hand and then remove the last remaining 2 bolts. And then hopefully I can maneuver this pan into my catch pan and not onto my own face. We'll see. So here's a look at our pan. Alright, next you're going to have to use a scraper or some razor blades and remove as much of the old gasket material from the pan as you can. Alright, next we'll clean everything up with some brake clean and these blue shop towels. By the way, these are awesome. I use them inside the house as well. It's super important the lip of this pan is completely clean and dry. Next, in order to address the areas where we have some bare metal showing, we're going to spray those areas with some epoxy paint. I'm going to cover the inside of the pan with this piece of cardboard so we don't get too much overspray inside this thing. Next, while we're waiting for this to dry, we're going to go over to our transmission and do some cleaning there as well. And here's a look at our transmission filter, and this is held in by 2 bolts that are going to require a T20 torque socket to remove. And then once again, using our scraper, we're going to have to clean this mating surface thoroughly. Alright, next up, our filter. Just make sure you get some transmission fluid on the seal. Once again, you run these in by hand. And again, hand tight is fine. Alright, now we are ready to install our new gasket and our newly painted transmission pan. And I think this is where everybody's got questions about RTV or other sealants and how or if any should be used. Alright, so if you're going to be reusing your old pan, the odds are that it's not perfectly flat and even. Therefore, I always use some RTV. Especially in a case like this, since we had no other option to bend this in order to remove it from our transmission. But the key part is that you use the right RTV silicone, an RTV silicone that's made to be used in an automatic transmission. Because additives and detergents in your automatic transmission fluid will quickly eat away at other RTV silicones. And if you have a hard time finding this at your local auto parts store, I'll put links to where you can buy this online in the description box down below. And the way I put RTV silicone is just basically put a bead down in the center, go around every bolt hole, all the way around the pan on the pan side. So you never put it on the transmission side because you simply don't need it. See, this is a thick, flat piece of metal here, and it's not going to bend or warp due to the heat cycles or anything else. Now, if you're going to be using a new high-quality pan, then your problems are going to be less. But I would still use just a tiny amount of RTV around the corners. That both helps seals it around the corners, and it also holds in place our gasket. Because making sure this gasket is nice and flat on this pan when you go to install this is pretty much the most important thing when it comes to trying to avoid leaks. Also, something else you should check before you put RTV silicone on this is that these bolt holes, the metal around it should be completely flat. Because sometimes people, when trying to stop leaks, will over torque the pan bolts and they'll bend the metal right around the bolt holes. And if you find out that's the case, you just get something flat underneath it and just gently tap it in and make it even. All right, let's get to it. All right, here comes the important part. Laying down our new gasket. And you want to make sure you lay it down nice and flat. Oh, as flat as you can. You just want to make sure you line up all the bolt holes exactly. That's the most important thing. All right, now we're ready to put this back on. So when I put this back on, I'm going to run the 2 bolts on the sides down just by hand. So this is held in place. And you don't want to run this down all the way that you can't move this, just in case you need to make adjustments. All right, next I'm going to torque these down to about 6 foot-pounds or 72 inch-pounds. This is the same. And again, we're going to go from the center out, crisscross manner. All right, next I usually like to wait an hour before I torque the bolts down to factory spec. And I think the torque spec for these bolts on this car is 13 foot-pounds. And now we do our final torque down, again working from center out. Alright, next we're just going to wait another 2 or 3 hours, or better yet, let this sit overnight, and then we're going to refill with new transmission fluid. Alright guys, so it's actually the next day, and now we're ready to add some transmission fluid and also do our DIY transmission fluid flush. Alright, so according to the repair manual for this car, if you're dropping the pan and replacing the transmission fluid and filter only, you're only supposed to add 1.5 quarts of transmission fluid. And a quart obviously being one of these guys, and as you can see, that's not a whole lot. But if you're doing a complete transmission overhaul and rebuild, which includes removing the torque converter, you're supposed to add 6 quarts of transmission fluid, which equals 1.5 gallons. So if only we were to do this and not do the DIY transmission flush that I'm about to show you, we would only be replacing about 25% of the transmission fluid. Oh, good God, what the f is rebuild? And the way we're going to go about doing this DIY transmission flush is going to be through our transmission cooler lines. See, every automatic transmission has to have a way to cool down the transmission fluid that's running through it. Now in the case of this Dodge, it has its own transmission cooler right here, which basically looks like a radiator, and in this case it's actually between our radiator and our AC condenser, and I can't really get you a close shot of it. But on a lot of cars, especially sedans like this 2009 Pontiac G3, the transmission fluid is basically cooled through the bottom portion of the radiator, and as you can see there's these 2 rubber lines that run transmission fluid through the bottom of the radiator. Now obviously one of these lines is going to be the output line, which takes transmission fluid out of the transmission and into the cooler. And one of them is going to be the return line. So what you want to do next is to find the output line. Now a quick way, if you have easy access to both lines, like in the case of this Pontiac, is to remove both lines and stick them both into a bucket. And then you get in the car, crank it for a few seconds, and the line that spits out transmission fluid, that's your output line. Or again, back on the Dodge here, you can look at the transmission lines where they go into the transmission. And we got one line here, and this is our second line. Sometimes it's obvious the one that's clearly going to be dumping fluid back into the oil pan is going to be the return line, and the other one the output line. Funny enough, on this one I'm not 100%, but I'm going to go with that one being the output since it's closer to the bell housing, and that's where the transmission fluid pump is. Alright, so next we'll go ahead and loosen this line and then get it out of the way. Next we need to get a rubber hose on this. I'm going to be using this clear vinyl tubing, which should make for a good visual for you guys watching this video. And make sure you use a clamp so it doesn't come loose. And next we'll stick the other end of the hose into a bucket, and in order to make sure we have the right transmission line, we're going to start the engine for a few seconds and then watch and make sure transmission fluid comes out of this line. Alright, so as you just saw, we do have the correct line, but since we don't have enough transmission fluid inside our transmission, we're not getting enough circulation here. We're supposed to shoot about 1 quart every 20 seconds out of that output line. So what I'm going to do next is to make sure I have my transmission fluid ready, then start the engine and start adding transmission fluid. Since I've already added 1.5 quarts, we would need to add 4.5 more quarts, but I'm actually going to just add 5 more quarts just to make sure we get most of the old transmission fluid out of the transmission. And if everything goes according to plan, you guys should be able to see the old, darker transmission fluid turn into newer, more clear transmission fluid as we're doing our flush. Now, to be honest, the transmission fluid that's in here, it's not that old, doesn't look that bad, so you may not see a whole lot of change, but you guys get the idea. Alright guys, so I just got done putting 3 quarts in there and nothing came out of our line, so I don't think our problem is low transmission fluid. So what I'm going to do next is to get in the car, start the engine, and try out different gears. Yeah, let's go neutral first. Oh, look at that, it's working. That's the key, you gotta put it in neutral. It's actually coming out pretty quick. Wow. Alright, you know what? I'm going to stop now. So it looks like just about 3 quarts or so. So I'm going to stop now. And here's a look at our transmission fluid. And again, as I said earlier, the transmission fluid that was in this car was already in pretty good condition and nice and clear. So you're not going to see a color change as the transmission fluid is coming out of this. But again, this just shows you how it's done. So what I'm going to do next is to add another 2 quarts. And then the same thing, get in the car, start the engine, put it in neutral. And then since I can keep an eye on this, if the level rises to about this level, I'm just going to stop. Oh, hell yeah. This thing can pee stronger than a 3-year-old. Alright, so in total, I've put in about 6.5 quarts of transmission fluid inside this transmission. And counting the transmission fluid I removed when I replaced the filter and dropped the pan, I replaced the fluid that was inside there. And add that to this fluid, I would say, this is just above that, which is okay because now I can put the line back into the transmission and start the car, put the car in gear, warm it up, and then check the transmission fluid level and add more fluid if necessary. And that should about cover it. Hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you did, do me a favor and share this video on your favorite social network. And also check out these other related videos, of which I'll put links to on this side of the screen that you can click on. There will also be links in the description box down below as well. Alright, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.